Cold War when the USA saved the world. Follow, like, share.
For over 40 years, the world held its breath. A silent, tense conflict, a war fought not with open armies clashing on a single field, but in the shadows, on the fringes, and in the minds of millions. This was the Cold War, a struggle that defined the second half of the 20th century. It was an era of stark contrasts, of black and white, of freedom versus control. And at the heart of this global standoff stood the United States, a nation that took upon itself the role of a guardian, a shield against the creeping tide of totalitarianism. Our story begins in the ashes of World War II. The great alliance that defeated fascism had fractured. A new and imposing shadow fell across the globe, stretching from the heart of Europe to the shores of Asia. An iron curtain, as Winston Churchill famously described it, had descended, dividing the world into two hostile camps. On one side, the promise of liberty, individual rights, and democratic choice. On the other, the doctrine of state control, of the collective over the individual. Championed by the Soviet Union, the first major flashpoint erupted on a peninsula in East Asia, Korea, in 1950. Forces from the Communist North, backed by Moscow and later Beijing, surged across the 38th parallel, aiming to unify the country under their red banner. The world watched, wondering if this was the first domino to fall. But America responded. In a brutal, seesaw conflict fought in frozen trenches and unforgiving mountains, American soldiers, alongside their United Nations allies, drew a line in the sand. They fought and bled not for conquest, but to preserve the freedom of a nation most had never heard of before. The Korean War was a grim testament to the new reality that the fight for freedom would be costly and it would be fought far from home. It was here, in the frostbitten landscapes of Korea, that the United States first demonstrated its resolve to contain the spread of communism, no matter the price. Back in Europe, the just stars symbolize Berlin. Deep within communist East Germany, West Berlin stood as an isolated island of freedom. It was a beacon of hope and a constant source of irritation for the Soviet bloc. In 1948, the Soviets tried to starve the city into submission with a blockade. America's response was not with tanks, but with planes. The Berlin airlift was an unprecedented feat of logistics and determination. For nearly a year, American and British pilots flew around the clock, delivering food, fuel, and supplies to the beleaguered citizens of West Berlin. It was a powerful message: we will not abandon you. This city, this outpost of democracy, would survive, but the Soviets were not deterred. In the dead of night, on August 13, 1961, the world awoke to a new, horrifying reality. A wall of concrete and barbed wire was being erected, slicing through the heart of Berlin. The Berlin Wall became the most potent and ugly symbol of the Cold War. It wasn't built to keep enemies out, but to lock its own people in. Families were torn apart, friends separated, and the hope of escape was extinguished for many. Yet, even in the shadow of the wall, the spirit of freedom flickered. President John F. Kennedy, standing before a massive crowd in West Berlin, delivered one of the most iconic speeches of the era. His words, "Ich bin ein Berliner, am Berliner roste Glob." It was a declaration of solidarity, a promise that America stood with all those who yearned for freedom, wherever they were. The tension reached its absolute peak just a year later, in October 1962. The the world teetered on the brink of nuclear annihilation. American surveillance planes discovered Soviet nuclear missile sites under construction in Cuba, just 90 miles from the Florida coast. For 13 days, the planet held its collective breath. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest humanity has ever come to self-destruction. The strategic chess match between President Kennedy and Soviet Premier Khrushchev was played out under the terrifying shadow of mushroom clouds. Kennedy chose a path of strength and restraint, instituting a naval coup Cuba, Itoa Haiscomble. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the Cold War would have turned catastrophically hot. In the end, diplomacy prevailed. The Soviets agreed to dismantle the missiles in exchange for an American pledge not to invade Cuba. The world stepped back from the abyss, profoundly shaken, but with a new understanding of the awesome and terrifying power that both sides wielded. The fight, however, soon shifted to a different kind of battlefield. The dense, suffocating jungles of Southeast Asia, Vietnam. What began as a mission to advise and support the South Vietnamese government against communist insurgency spiraled into a full-scale war. For more than a decade, American soldiers fought a grueling, often invisible enemy in a conflict that would deeply divide the nation back home. They battled not only the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army, but also the unforgiving terrain, the oppressive heat, and a growing sense of uncertainty. The war in Vietnam was complex, controversial, and painful. It tested the limits of American power and challenged the nation's conscience. Yet, amidst the turmoil and debate, we must not forget the courage of the individual soldiers. Young men sent to a foreign land who faced unimaginable horrors daily. They fought with bravery and honor for what they believed was a just cause to stop another country from falling to communism. To give the people of South Vietnam a chance to choose their own destiny. Their sacrifices, their valor in the jungles and rice paddies are an indelible part of this story. They were the frontline defenders in a global ideological struggle. Through it all, from the frozen hills of Korea to the divided streets of Berlin. From the nuclear precipice of the Cuban crisis to the steamy jungles of Vietnam, the United States held the line. It wasn't a perfect stand. Mistakes were made, and the costs were immense, both in treasure and in human lives. But the resolve never wavered. The core principle remained, that tyranny should not be allowed to expand unopposed, that people everywhere deserve the right to be free. This decades-long vigil was a testament to American endurance. It required a generation of citizens to live with the constant, low-level hum of anxiety, the knowledge that the world could end in a flash of light. It required a military ready to deploy at a moment's notice to any corner of the globe. And it required a political will, shared by presidents of both parties, to bear the heavy burden of leading the free world. This long, twilight struggle ultimately culminated in the collapse of the very ideology it sought to contain. In 1989, the Berlin Wall, that hated symbol of oppression, was torn down not by armies, but by the hands of ordinary people, emboldened by the enduring promise of freedom that America had championed for so long. The Soviet Union itself dissolved just 2 years later. The Cold War is now a chapter in the history books. But the lessons it holds are timeless. It teaches us that freedom is not free, that it must be defended with courage and conviction. The black and white footage of this era reveals a world of real danger and immense stakes. It shows us the faces of American service members standing guard in distant lands, the faces of citizens yearning for liberty behind an iron curtain. Their stories, their sacrifices, changed the destiny of humanity, ensuring that the 21st century would dawn not under the shadow of a single dominant tyranny, where free radio has to shine. History is filled with powerful stories that are often hidden from view. If you want to uncover more of these pivotal moments that have shaped our world, subscribe to Dark Supreme Front. Thank you for watching.